Loretta the Diaper Witch, Scene 1. The contact between Loretta and Rupert would be accidental. Loretta was behind Rupert with both heading into the amalgamate for their own reasons. Rupert was heading for the deli and dinner, while Loretta the pharmacy desperate for aspirin. They were using the handled doors and not the automatics to avoid a train of carts moving into the store. Rupert, ahead of Loretta, was reaching for the large glass door first. He had just girded himself subconsciously for the weight of the glass as he was about to grip the handle and pull. He only missed the handle by an inch when a person on the other side pulled first. Rupert watched the handle start to drift away from his grasp. Rupert, knowing he missed the handle, had already braced and leaned back in anticipation of pulling the heavy glass door. He'd been thinking of dinner and how hungry he was and not about losing the weight of the door. Rupert didn't compensate, so he immediately lost his balance and started falling backwards. "Damn it," Rupert said, more to himself, but out loud. He realized his mistake too late, and knew there was nothing he could do about it, nor what was to come. As Rupert went back, he became desperate to recover. As most do, he instinctively began rotating his arms as if the act of pretending he could fly would generate enough lift to get his legs back under him. It was a futile effort which didn't stop the attempt. He was going over and knew it. Loretta, a few feet back, and nearly blinded by her headache, was closing with Rupert, but she couldn't see it. Between the headache's pain and dazzling bright sunlight adding to it, she had nearly closed her eyes. For those last few agonizing steps Loretta walked, Rupert was nearly invisible. Rupert took 2 more off-balance steps backward before falling directly into Loretta. Loretta was only half aware and threw her hands up instinctively, also falling backwards. Loretta, already driven nearly to tears by her migraine, lashed out in pain. That harsh collision drove her head forward first, then back rapidly, creating a blinding flash in her vision, watering her eyes. Loretta didn't even know she was reacting, as she winced. Loretta's pain, already driving her nearly mad, had grown even worse. It was leaving her no choice as she squinted desperately at the intruder to wave him away. Any other time, lifelong training would have controlled her actions and she would have pushed with precision and guidance. But Loretta was out of control. In this case, pain had buried that training and she had no access to it. Everything was operating near a primitive level. What made it worse, Loretta didn't measure her force as she might have, and for the first time since the age of 5 she lashed out uncontrolled. Most of her skills were decades old now, so she could have easily handled the encounter. She should have. She would have, easily, but she had ignored her migraine till it was too late, and now her pain was unimaginable. When Rupert reached her, she was incapable of managing any conflict, let alone the one she thought was occurring. She saw Rupert through the anguish of her migraine. She fought Rupert in those first few seconds as an adversary. She was back in her training days. Her superior mind could have easily killed him. Rupert did wonder somewhere in his thoughts where that blast of heat came from. Thankfully, in those milliseconds that it managed on its own, the conscious side of Loretta prevailed and Rupert lived. Not only did he live, but the crushing injuries he could have sustained never came. That force coalescing just above his head, crushing it like an egg that would have horrified bystanders, suddenly dissipated in a soft blast of heat. 2 things did happen though, and both happened at once. Rupert was physically forced back in the direction he had originally been heading, and there was an odd warmth at the base of his head. No, Rupert would later remember it as inside his head, but near the base. Rupert's didn't know it, but his hypothalamus was engulfed in the same sudden warmth as his body. There was a sensation of something inside his head gently squeezing him into submission. That slight squeeze sent a powerful but very primitive impulse through Rupert's brain. Rupert's hypothalamus, a walnut-sized part of the brain, was actually a regulator. That was the part warming. That was the part Loretta was touching. Loretta had learned this in her teens and was squeezing it just as you might a grape without popping it. Her pressure, rolling it from the middle to the top, triggered a fight or flee response. Loretta had also learned that in her teens as she created chaos in Rupert's endocrine system. That chemical messenger system was now rushing hormones throughout Rupert's circulatory system, warning the body to brace itself. Within a normal range of heartbeats, Rupert's body got replenishments about once every second. When Rupert was pushed back and Loretta squeezed his hypothalamus, triggering that fight or flee response, his heart rate doubled. His heart was pumping twice that rate in half the time. Within 1 second his body was also making adrenaline, and the next full beat his body was flooded with it. Rupert's muscles were now awash and ready for whatever he demanded of it. His rate had reached flea level, and blood sugar manufacturing went up to exponentially to start feeding the machine for a sustained run. New hormones sent neurotransmissions back, reporting that the machine was ready and the only thing left was to batten down the hatches. Rupert, by the next second, and at his subconscious level, was now desperate to run. With the flight imperative fully engaged, other parts of his body began preparing for his run as acid production in his stomach stopped. As desperation grew, other functions began dropping in priority, and Rupert unknowingly went into a panic. He was entering his third tick of the second hand on his wristwatch. It was time to run. In that instant, Rupert's brain, the deep primitive part of his brain, automatically released his bladder in anticipation of Rupert running for his life. Rupert was fortunate because before leaving the house he had left his solids in a toilet bowl. Had he not done so, those two would be releasing. For those additional few seconds that followed, Rupert wasn't even aware he was wetting, but that quickly changed. He was turning back to help the woman he'd knocked over. For a moment there was an instant of gallantry till his wet pants touched his leg, warmer in some spots. That wetness galvanized him instantly to oppose any other use of his hands other than to bring them back and cover himself. Rupert chose compromise by covering himself with one hand and aiding the woman with the other. Rupert, feeling the warmth in that instant, was shocked over his loss of control. There was absolutely no rationale that could justify him wetting. It left him overwhelmingly confused and suddenly terribly embarrassed. Even as he still tried helping. "I'm so sorry," Rupert said, apologizing while knowing full well he'd wet himself. It was an impossibility, in spite of the evidence. He could deny it, but there's no hiding it, and even more shocking, he was actually still wetting. There was no logic to this, as he added in despair, "What the hell?" Loretta, realizing what she'd done, pulled back on her hold immediately, but it was too late. She did hold him, and in doing so took his hand, but she also lifted herself to her feet. She did so just as the young man moved to help her, and right as he realized he'd wet himself. It was his apology that made her remember all of her training. Compassion returned as well. She covered her mouth in revulsion. Not revulsion, that was too refined a word, she was horrified. In all of her years she had never come close to doing what she'd done. She had gone past her training, completely past it. She could have easily killed the boy still wetting himself. It scared her beyond reason. "Oh honey, what have I done?" Loretta said purely out of guilt as she stood alongside the young man. Rupert stood, bent slightly, confused, looking down at himself with shock, then back at her as she added, "It's going to be okay." I lost my balance," Rupert stammered. He sounded like a child trying desperately to explain his accident to a teacher in the schoolyard or a mother looking down at a child. "I know honey, I know," Loretta said, taking his elbow and trying desperately to reassure him. But I just wet myself. "I don't know what just happened," Rupert said, looking desperately confused at the woman, then around at the other people. I don't know why I did that. I've never done that." I know, precious. It's not your fault. Please, it's not your fault. If it's anyone's fault, it's mine. I reacted before I even realized I was reacting," Loretta said. "It's me. It's all me. It was the pain. My migraine. I wasn't paying attention. You're just a bystander." "What? I don't understand. What are you saying? How could you do this?" Rupert asked, slightly confused. He knew better. He had bumped into the woman. I shouldn't have squeezed you so hard, Loretta said apologetically. If I'd been thinking, I would have just pushed a little. I'm in so much pain. Squeeze me. How could you squeeze me, lady? You were not close enough to squeeze me, Rupert said, trying to understand how she could say that when she had fallen one way and he the other. Come to think of it. How did he fall the other way, he wondered. It's okay, honey, it's difficult to explain. You know what? Never mind all that. It doesn't matter. You've had an accident. Let's worry about that first. In fact, forget what I just said. Never mind any of it. You need help. That's what matters, Loretta said. But you said you did this? How could you have done this? Rupert asked, and then suddenly went quiet again as he looked down. He looked at Loretta in desperation, panic on his face. I'm wetting again. Oh God. Never mind all that for now, Loretta said. Come on, let's get you away from the public first. This is not going to get any better anytime soon. Loretta moved alongside Rupert and put her arm around his shoulders. Come on, I'm parked right over there, it's fairly close and we can hide you while we get this straightened out. Rupert, already desperate to hide, allowed himself to be guided away from public view as Loretta aimed him for her car. She cursed again over what she had done. She also squinted against the throbbing pain still stabbing at her behind her eyes. If she didn't get that taken care of, she was going to pass out. Rupert meekly allowed himself to be led, praying no one saw him, believing everyone did. The trio, almost 3,000 miles away, felt it.